So now that the relationship has ended, paternity has been determined, and custody has been established, the hard work of co-parenting begins. If you're ready to stop the drama and work through the trauma, it's time for Co-Parent Court with your host, Judge Rochelle Jackson. Welcome to Co-Parent Court, the court where parents forget the drama and work through their traumas. And again, I am your host, Judge Rochelle Jackson, and we have in the studio with us again, KJ Franklin. And KJ is going to share, we're doing a series on trauma, and this is our second taping. So KJ, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Introduce yourself to the audience again, and if you would briefly just outline what are some of the topics we're going to cover on today.
Hi, it's great to be here again. My name is KJ Franklin. I am here on Judge Rochelle's show to help explain trauma and childhood trauma and how it affects parenting and co-parenting. Today, we are going to do a continuation of the ACE test and go through the questions for those that actually took the test. Last week, we'll go through the questions. If you didn't have a chance to take the test, we'll allow you this opportunity to score yourself and kind of talk about the scoring. We're also going to go a little bit in depth on the impacts that childhood trauma has on an individual and how it affects someone who has been abused or that's may become an abuser in a relationship or as a parent. And we're also going to discuss a few strategies that deals with trauma for self and from others.
Okay, so last week we talked about taking the ACEs test, and I said I would take it, and I did. And we'll share my score. So do you want to do the questions? I can answer those if you want to do it in this moment.
We could do a live
all right.
question answer period for those individuals that want to take the ACE test with us. Go ahead and get pen and paper. It's only a 10 question test. As I read out the question, you'll answer yes or no to the question. And from there, we'll score it, and I'll explain what risk factor you are for having some stress.
And let's just do the qualifier. And we're not comparing. Please don't compare my score with your score, but
not at all. And we're not here to diagnose you either. We just want to give you an idea and expose you to the ACE test, and that there are some things that's out there to help identify if you have childhood trauma. And the questions are very simple questions to answer. And you may not even have realized that you were someone that was exposed, or that these factors can even contribute to being someone that had childhood trauma. This moment, again, is not to diagnose you, but to educate you on things that may impact your parenting style and co-parenting actions. And basically that's what we're here to do, to educate you so you can be better parents and co-parents when it comes to that nature, and self-identify some factors where you can improve and work on yourself to help you get rid of all the drama and work through the trauma.
All right. And just one more before you ask me the series of questions. I have a question, KJ. And these questions are just a reflection of how I envision my response when I was a child. But there are also additional traumas and assessments outside of these childhood traumas that a person could do an assessment on. Is that correct?
Of course, yes. This is just like an initial phase of questioning. Before anybody start any type of therapy, they'll go through a detailed assessment just to see what factors work or may not work for them. Again, this is just some questions just to kind of put a little outlier out there. But before anyone starts true therapy, they are fully assessed with some more details. Okay, in a way, prior to us going live, Judge Rochelle did share her score with me, and I started assessing her score, and that's kind of how the assessment will kind of go to have that deeper dive in it. But we won't do that on air, but that's how one would be assessed if they were really in the setting of a therapist.
All right, so I'm ready.
Okay. Question 1. Did a parent, and for each question is basically a yes or no response, so either yes or no. Number 1, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you in an act or a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt?
No.
Number 2, did a parent or adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured?
No.
Number 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you? Or have you touched their body in a sexual way, attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you?
No.
Number 4, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special?
No.
Or thought that family members didn't look out for you or care, or feel close to each other or support each other?
No.
Number 5, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor, even if you needed it?
No.
Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced?
I'm going to say yes to that because my dad, when I read that question, I took a couple of these tests and it's almost the same, but I think they added a abandon or debt to that one. So that's where I got a yes at because my dad died when I was 6 years old.
Okay.
So I put that down as separation. I think that's what they were also going toward.
Okay. Number 7, was your parent slash caregiver often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at him or her? Did they
No.
sometimes,
Oh,
often, or very often kick, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife?
no.
Number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs?
I don't know if I'll say yes or no to this one. And I'll say no because most of my life I lived with my mom up till my dad was, I was, 6.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad did have a substance abuse problem.
Okay.
So I guess that could be one. So maybe I'll be at 2. I'm not. So we'll say a yes there.
Okay. Number 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide?
No.
And 10, did a household member go to prison?
No.
Okay, so if we tally up all of the yes, we'll give our audience time to tally up all of the yes, and then we'll be able to rate however many yes that we have. Judge Rochelle, you can go ahead and share your score. So you have 2 out of 10, you would say?
Yes.
Okay, I'll share my score. I have 6 out of 10. So anyone with a score between 1 and 3 is at an intermediate risk for toxic stress and physiology. If you have a 4 or higher, you're at high risk. for toxic stress physiology, which basically means that 9 out of 10 times you have experienced childhood trauma. You may have certain things that will trigger or may trigger you. You will exhibit some stressors, some of those stressors that we discussed last week. And it can be things as simple as witnessing any of those things that we discussed, trying to survive or work in survivor mode to not relive some of those things that we discussed. Not saying that we all fall victim to trauma and stressors in our life, but however, when we do realize that we may be at some form of risk, being educated about the risks and being educated on ways to work through it and being able to identify if you have any type of trauma-informed patterns and behaviors is the most important thing that we want you to get out of this whole panel of sessions right now. What we don't realize is certain things that happen during our childhood affects our adult relationships, affect our parenting style, affects our relationships with coworkers or marital or
children,
partners and children. Something that we don't realize is our children mimics the parents. And sometimes they either going to grow up to be like us and adapt to some of the things that they see, and or they probably going to grow up and try to run away from us and some of the things that they grew up and see. And sometimes when they run in the opposite direction, they may not always run into something that's positive.
I have part of my professional training also, I was I don't like to say I was, but I am a certified educator, and I spent lots of years working with children. And as such, I got a great opportunity to see their parents, right, in my administrative role. And children would be referred or written up for some discipline issue. In particular, I'll talk about the language that children use. And oftentimes when I go to stores and the Walmarts and the supermarkets, and I witness parents screaming and yelling at their children and using profanity. And then they come to school and we're saying, you can't talk like that. And you call the parent with the hopes that you all could figure out together how to resolve some behavior issue that's interfering with teaching and learning. And the parents come over with the same behavior that you're trying to correct a child from. And it's like, wait, how do we correct this behavior when they're learning it at home? And every day you're demonstrating what we would deem as behaviors that's not positive for children to thrive in. It doesn't lend to growth, and it hinders when they're screaming, yelling, cussing, and fussing at people. And when I read that question, I was shocked that oh, this is what they're asking. I'm not quite sure how the researchers came up with what particular questions they were going to pose to make these categories, or what the importance of those particular questions are. But I've witnessed many times, and it's something that even in my practice now, when I counsel with parents about behaviors, like how do we address certain behaviors now that we know perhaps what categories are. So I don't know if you could share a little bit about that, if you want to expand on that conversation, but I'm concerned, which is why I wanted to do the series about parents' behavior and the impact that it has on children. And in particular, the language that we use with children that was hurtful to you as a child, and yet you mimic it because you've learned it on your children. And it's a cycle. And how do we break that cycle of verbally abusing people?
The sad part of it all is their norm. And sometimes when it's not recognized as indifferent behavior, they don't see or recognize that anything is wrong with it. So partially this ACE test and identifying that that is something so simple as, being in a household with that type of language can put you at a potential risk for stress and toxic stress physiology, is educating one that that is not normal behavior. But because over time, or because depending on the lifestyle in which someone has been raised in, that has become normal behavior. And that's why educators, when they do call the parent in because they're trying to teach the child something different, the parent don't necessarily see that anything is wrong with that, because that's something that they has witnessed as a child as well, and they is their norm, so they're now doing it and passing it down, and they're creating like unhealthy imbalances or whatever in behavior. You often have to meet people where they are, and not saying that you have to accept that behavior. And I am an educator from a higher mostly higher learning college stance, so I mostly dealt with adults, but also teaching the parents of these kids. That was my opportunity to teach them how to be exposed to something that's positive, or be able to teach. I utilize that opportunity to expose them to things that they may not have been exposed of. Look at my rating, 6 out of 10. That's not something that I'm proud of, but clearly I have some childhood trauma. But being exposed to things other than what I was raised with, it takes some time and some navigating. But an individual also has to be open with it. I have friends and real close relatives that deals with these kids every day. They teach, high school and middle school. And that's a huge turning point for individuals, because they're learning their self, and they're trying to also develop their own identity and who they are going to be, as an adult at that turning phase, because they're gaining some independence. So they can either choose to mimic what they was raised in, whether it's good or bad, or this is a chance for educators or healthcare professionals or therapists or counselors to intervene and meet them where they are and expose them to different things.
Yeah. And it's challenging. So as we go from children recognizing, or I guess as we reflect now, a lot of times when we're doing the co-parenting aspect and the breakup of the relationship happen, then lines are drawn, and it's like, well, she does this and he does that. And you'll see how the impact of their childhood and how they were raised and what their experiences are now, that's now in conflict with raising a child that they share together. So you have all of those experiences, and that's all they know. And the work is, so how do you work through all of that trauma to make sure that your child gets the benefit, the good benefit that both parents have to bring, have to offer in rearing the child? And that's
Just
the
like it
struggle of,
takes,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, just like it takes two to make a child, it takes two to work it out. It takes two to understand. It takes two to communicate. Most individuals don't realize how hard it is to become one. Before we have kids, becoming one and learning each other and learning each other's background and childhood is very important in any relationship. And if we fail to learn each other's background, where we come from, and understand and accept and be able to work through it, we run into these obstacles. But at some point, that's where the parents have to come to some understanding. Okay, we need this mediator, or we need family therapy, or we need someone who can sit in the midst and make me better understand why you feel and think this way and why I feel and think this way. And then look at what we created and this division or this the demise of this child, and how we can now better pour into that child to make them a better human being, a better adult, kind of de-traumatize them in certain ways.
And just like you were mentioning earlier, that once the assessment's done, and the whole point of this series is just to expose the audience to options. So we have the option of getting counseling for trauma. And when it comes to parenting and co-parenting, there are classes that we suggest for co-parenting classes, for parenting classes. There are opportunities for mediation, for parental guidance, just like how it could look, or what it should look like in a positive for children. So there are always resources that are available. And the hope is that our audience who's listening, and perhaps I'll take this moment. It's always said that you're supposed to plug. So we ask those of you who have tuned in that you share, subscribe, like, and maybe tag somebody in that you know who perhaps could benefit from listening to this conversation, so that they can get some information and begin a new journey in terms of being the best parent and co-parent that they can be for their children. Because we're always concerned with the next generation. Those are going to be our caregivers. Those are going to be the people who are making decisions and moving our society forward. And we want to make sure that as concerned citizens and professionals and elders and learned people in society, that we're always trying to share information and always trying to move people forward. And that's the intent of what this show is about here at Co-Parent Court, and why I wanted to make sure we bring some experts in front of you, so we have a valid um, resource. That we have a person who's about to become a doctor, who decided that she was going to give a few hours of her time and make sure that she could share with you about the traumas and getting good information to you. So it would just behoove you to tune in and to be wise and to gather more information so that you can change, because you're the only person who can make the change. We can tell you, but it's only when self decides that he or she is going to do something different that you're going to see change. And if you
And
recognize that you
something,
need change.
yes, something you mentioned, one reason why I went into community counseling and specializing in traumatology is because, like you said, there are parenting classes that people have to go through. And I'm sure in your courts and stuff, you see this all the time. Let's send them to a class on how to become a better parent. But do you ever send them to classes on how to become a better person, on how to work on themselves? Any like mental health related counseling, any mandated counseling, even if it's just for 4 sessions, although a good 12 session counseling session can help a great bit of things. Mental health is being more accepted now in today's world, but it's still not there. We still not all the way there. So even if we have like some family marriage counselors, that may be tuned in, you can plug your business into I guess the comments as well, because it's needed and it's not always showcased. It's just as important for that person to identify their mental health, to identify their childhood trauma, because the impact of trauma on individual health is huge, is major. It affects everything. It creates a loss of hope for people. It puts a strain on relationships with family and friends and employers. It causes depression, anxiety. It's a wealth of feelings that someone, exhibits, that collectively, just give off traumatic stress reactions that can be dangerous for anybody in a household or any child. Um, and sometimes when those things go undiagnosed or untreated, certain things I don't want to reference, I was about to reference something that happened locally, in our community. But children are endangered, children are killed because sometimes we don't look at the mental health of the parent or the situation at hand, and when that parent or decides to split, how much strain and how they may be triggered by a traumatic or past traumatic experience, or they may feel like they're reliving an experience, or they're being or feeling like they're being avoided or anything, or it just could be like very detrimental. And I mean, I was referencing well, I don't want to say it on the show,
Well,
but
you can say, let me also add this, because I have an array uh of knowledge, and so what I also do in my professional life is I represent survivors of domestic violence. So when people deal with trauma and it's not perhaps treated or guided in the right way, that results in violence. And I get to see the end
yes,
results of people being stuck in these volatile relationships. And sometimes they get in those relationships. I'm saying sometimes because again, I'm not a doctor who can diagnose. I just recognize that what you're hearing this abusive relationship, and I know it has to stem from the trauma in their life, right? As being a
yes,
victim, and we like to call them survivors because we try and help them to escape that so that they can reflect of how they made it through. And at the same time, we have these abusers who also bring their own trauma that they have not escaped either. And it clashes, and the result that we see when we look at it, and we're on the news, and we see killings of former partners, and we see killings of children, and we also see children who commit these crimes and acts. But it all stems from, I would suspect, some untreated trauma or some traumatic episode that's recognized after the fact of the violence. So, I mean, trauma, violence is a result of, and if you can speak to this, and I don't know what research says on it, if you can share with the audience, how is violence connected to trauma? Is that something that you've researched or that you can speak on in this moment?
yeah, most violence acts is derivative of childhood trauma. Rapists, violent murder offenders. It's kind of like a sensory element of things that trigger one's mind and behavior pattern to operate in a world of fantasy. And sometimes they're not living in real life time, if that makes sense. They're living in a secluded nature of a realm of just trying to, it's a game to them. And I mean, even with this, the fentanyl crisis and different things, like sometimes a lot of that is, it's just behavior health things that's just, I can't pinpoint it because it's so much. It's such a vast reason behind it, and it's a lot of things that affects it. It's individuals, like I say, re-experiencing things, symptoms of traumatic stress reactions, re-experiencing avoidance, arousal, and reactivity, cognitive mood symptoms. It's all of those things like combined that can be triggered and reenacted by individual that can cause them to act in a violent nature. And studying the human mind is very intriguing. Each individual operate and think differently. A reason why someone chooses to do something is very different. It's rare that you have two violent offenders sitting next to each other. They may have created the exact same violent crime or whatever, but their reasoning behind it and a functionality on why they did it can be two different polar effects on how and what they experience to make them create that. But yes, trauma, undiagnosed trauma, a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of things that they've seen growing up, a lot of ways and methods that they was raised and things they was exposed to growing up is a reason for a lot of the violent nature of things that's going on now.
I guess we can go down, I won't say this whole or that road because it's so much. But
It's a lot. I'm sorry. Yeah, I couldn't pinpoint one thing because it's so much. But I mean, there is relations. I could bring up statistics, but even with coming up with the statistical value, like doing DAS theory and all of that type of stuff, like I can take in the economic status, the age, the race. Like I can compose statistical data from so many standpoints, whether or not they believe in God. It's just a bunch of things. Just like those 10 questions, I can take and question someone with 50 questions just to give a proper statistical value on how it can correlate. That's how vast and different it is, and that's how creative and beautiful the mind is. I know I said the mind is beautiful, but it's beautiful and unique in the manner in which it's just different. It's no one way of thinking. It's no one way to approve and diagnose somebody for the way and reason on why they did something the way that they did it.
Yeah, I give thanks every day. I'm like, thank you, Lord, for giving me a good mind. And we're all different, and and it doesn't matter. And well, I don't know what the matter is or the influence would be because you can have children. In my household, there were five of us, five siblings, and we had the same. You would think we had the same experiences, right? But we each look at it differently, and it impacted our lives differently. So even though you're raised by the same mom and dad, you're in the same situation. Every individual is unique. And my hope for the audience is that they recognize that perhaps they can talk with a professional and get some help or some guidance, or just try and see, what they need. So what can we gave a website last time, at least a test. Is there a recommendation? Because unfortunately, we can't recommend them to you today. Well, in a few months, we'll be able to do that. But is there a site that you would suggest that the audience can begin to explore to try and get some assistance with their traumatic needs, or their psychological needs, or their emotional needs, that what y'all do when y'all study, the human body and the mind? Where can the audience go for that this week?
Yeah, I don't like to plug one place in particular because I never know the individual's accessibility as far as what they can outreach to. But a good place is starting in schools with counselors. I notice a lot of schools have social workers that's there and they could refer out. Another place would be college campus. A lot of them have psychology programs with and social work programs, and I know they have some student counselors there on site too if you are a college age student. They may even take some individuals that's a tad bit younger with parental consent. Churches are becoming more open to the mental health crisis that's available. So another place would be like the church outreach group, or if they have like holistic care or well-being. It's kind of sad that a lot of entities don't have it available in hospitals like they once had, but if you just Google mental health, some places may show up. Of course, if you have private insurance, a lot of places accept private insurance. You just have to pay your copay. But getting assessed properly, if you feel that if you have a little tingle in your soul, a little tingle in your heart that says, hey, I may need to reach out and get a little help, act on that, because that's your intuition let you know, let me fill my cup back up. Let me put some self-care back in myself. Don't look at it like, oh, something is wrong with me. look at it as, let me better myself. Let me create that soft life for myself. I don't have to live a hardcore life because my family did. And nothing is wrong with pouring positivity in you, especially if you don't have it surrounding you. Sometimes talking to family and friends can be all you need, and sometimes you just need a tad bit more. Some things you don't want to open up, to family or close friends, because you may feel a little embarrassed about some things. But if you have a little tingle in your soul and your spirit and your heart that says, let me just reach out and look for help, a good starting point can be your church outreach community health center. Some college campuses that have psychology and social work programs. And if you have private insurance, like I say, you can reach out, and especially to those individuals that's listening to this podcast, go ahead and plug in your mental health services or your family and marriage counseling services. And you never know, it can send some business your way. And if you have any outreach or programs that that's going on that's free to the community for those who cannot afford or don't have the accessibility to get the help or get to where you are, they may have some virtual things that's going on. Like I said, my number one goal right now is to educate individuals on what's out there, what may be a problem, and to help kind of guide and steer them to that inkling of feeling to find the help and stuff that they need.
All right. So we did have a framework. I don't know if we stayed within the context of what we said we were going to talk about this week. KJ, is there anything else that you want to touch on? If not, we can save it for next week because we do have at least one more series. And if necessary, I'm sure KJ will come back and give us two.
No,
more episodes.
I'm done. I think we went over time for today. I'm done. If someone have anything or any questions that they want to ask or want us to touch on more, or any topics or anything related to what we are supposed to be talking about, go ahead and just put in the comments, and I'll try to stay on task and answer those for next week.
All right, so let's talk about where you can perhaps listen to this series. So we're on Spotify, and everything is Co-Parent Court. We also have a website called coparentcourt.com where you can look at and listen to all the episodes that's been released. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. So wherever you can drop your comment, and we'll be responsive to all of those social media platforms. But at the end of the day, our goal is to share with you information that will put you in a better position so that you could be a better co-parent.